So welcome back, everybody, to the Defiance Spirit and Wealth 360, where we bring together the Defiance Spirit, the Enneagram, and all things financial with our resident financial guru and expert, Michael Feiner. What's happening, buddy?
Not too much. How are you, B?
I see you got the game gear on with that Feiner cool
We're
t-shirt, sweatshirt.
We're down in the Naples office today, so we get to be casual because no one here wears a suit. The last person who saw me in my three-piece suit asked me where the funeral was, so I've decided to go with the flow down here.
It's not easy to go with the flow for a 3, an Enneagram 3.
It is not. It's hard, but I said at least I'll wear my, finer gear. But I probably should get some, my shorts on or something.
So Enneagram 3s, though, are known to be chameleons. They can adapt, they can adjust. It maybe takes them a moment, but you did it.
I'm working. I'm trying. I'm doing my best.
You're trying. Well, you're doing a good job, and you can represent the 3s another day, because today we're not talking about Enneagram 3. Moving on, moving to our final type. So anybody who's been listening to us knows we've just taken you around the wheel of the Enneagram. I've been doing it in a separate podcast on the general approach to each Enneagram type. And Michael and I have been partnering, of course, on Wealth 360, where we explore the same conversation, but through the lens of finance, of investing, of wealth. And so we're going to wrap it up on our it has been more than 9 weeks, but our 9-week journey of all 9 types with the Peacemaker, Enneagram number 9. Yeah. Everybody's favorite.
Yeah, I mean, my opposite too. So I realize.
Many ways you're opposite, because on behind me, if you're watching, there's a triangle, and that line 9 and 3 and 6 are they're the primal kind of points of the Enneagram, 9, 3, 6. And so a lot to say about the 9. Let's talk a little bit big picture, sort of generic, and then we'll get into the financial side of things. So 9, the peacemaker, sometimes called the mediator, the gentle spirit, the peace seeker, but you sort of get the vibe. 9s are the nice guy, the nice gal of the Enneagram system. What else do we know about the 9, my friend?
No, I think the 9 seem to be, people who want to avoid conflict, who, like you said, are peaceful people who want to see an equilibrium, in the world. They just want to see things, a good yin and yang balance.
They do. There's just a softness to them. There's a harmony. There are some types you can tell that what they're like last week's type 8, you can really feel the intensity of an 8. You can feel whatever the opposite of intensity is, the harmony of a 9. I have a daughter who's a 9. I have a sister who's a 9. I got a lot of clients who are 9s. You just they sort of bring down your blood pressure. Probably a good thing to have.
Harmony is a great word for it. I do think that is a great way to express it.
And, here's some famous 9s. I'm not going to share the picture. I'll just tell you, who they are. But so some of them are not surprising, and then some are surprising. So Fred Rogers, right? If I think of a 9,
oh my God,
I think of Mr. Rogers.
I just watched that this weekend. I just watched on Netflix.
Oh, I thought you meant the TV show. You mean the movie? Yeah.
About him, about his life.
So Mr. Rogers, even the way he talked brought down the energy. You know who else was a 9? Remember back in the day, Michael?
Not Captain Kangaroo or something.
Maybe Captain Kangaroo. I remember Mr. Green Cheese. Bob Ross. Do you remember Bob Ross, the painter? He was pretty little picture.
Unlike public TV, that guy.
Yeah. He was always on TV, public, teaching us a pretty little cloud. Here we're now gonna, and just the way he talked to you felt like he was therapeutically talking you off the ledge as you were about to jump. And by the end, you're like, oh. What was interesting about him, Bob Ross, is that he was a military man. Really? And he retired, after a career in the military.
Who would have guessed that?
But see, that's the thing about 9s, and that's why I bring him up, because 9s are surprising. They can be warriors. They can be on the battlefield. They can go head to head with Ronald Reagan was a 9. Barack Obama was a 9. Bill Clinton was a 9. These are not wallflowers. There's a piece of them that digs their heels in and is really strong, even when they appear to be wallflowers. But that's a strategy. That's a tactic. That's not who they are. So that harmony, that peaceful piece, I'm not saying it's not authentic, but I am saying we tend to underestimate nines.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, in the sense of they do make you feel relaxed and calm. Their dispositions are, like you said, we're at 8, we feel the tension and you feel the energy in an 8. If you know what an 8 is because they dominate that energy field. A 9 is the opposite. They're calming.
They're calming, except that's above the surface. It was pointed out once, they're sort of like ducks above the surface. You see a duck, waddling across the pond over over near your neck of the woods. I just blanked on the pond name.
Oh, the common. Well, you're thinking of Boston Common, right?
Oh, Boston Commons, whatever. But you see the duck, the duck pond above the water. They look calm and cool and collected. But if you see under the water, they're paddling like hell. And there is that quality of nines where you only see above the surface and what they're presenting, but their interior world doesn't always feel peaceful. What's going on behind the scenes doesn't feel peaceful, but they're also strong. So for instance, you have somebody on your team, I won't name him, who appears peaceful and calm, but I've been on some calls with him, on business calls, where he really can get tough. Like he can really hold his own and get the point across. And that's always surprising to me when I'm working with nines. We tend to underestimate them until their back is against the wall, until you push them up against something that they really believe in, and then they can get tough.
Yeah, that's an important point. I've noticed on the nines as I learn more about them. They are that way, but like you said, until they're pushed to the limit, or until they have a deadline, or until there's a reason to have to push it, that's when they kind of activate. They just activate later than everyone else.
Right. So they go into, they can't get into their anger if they're not doing the work, if they're not responding. Our language is you're either reacting or responding. So if they're reacting, they go away from the anger, they go away from the conflict, they run from it. 8s run to it. They're yin and yang on the Enneagram. Last week's conversation, if you're listening, and this week's are night and day. But it's not that they aren't angry. It's that they push the anger down. And what happens with a 9 is they turn into the Incredible Hulk. Remember Bruce Banner?
So Bruce Banner, was he at 9?
He's a 9, but so is the Hulk.
9. The Hulk. No, the Hulk's a 9.
Because what happened, Bruce Banner he would try and hold back his anger and hold it back and hold it back. And then he would just get triggered and it would just erupt into the Hulk. And people talk about 9s all the time. If you know a 9, they blow their lid. And when they blow their lid, brother, look out. They just don't do it frequently and they don't do it in front of just anybody.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So they have power, but it's like a volcano that comes erupting out. The work of a 9 is to be honest about the anger, to learn how to get into it before it explodes like the Hulk. But by and large, they run from the anger, they run from the conflict. And so, 9s can be very conflict avoidant. 9s, I bet, get into your work now. I bet it's hard sometimes to communicate with 9s when they smile, they say yes, their head's moving in the yes direction, but underneath the smile and underneath the head nodding, they're saying no.
Yeah, I think you've taught me a lot about 9s, and it's going to my counter Enneagram. It's the lowest, my lowest number when you did a test for me. So I probably empathize or understand at least. But like you said, the problem with a 9 is that a lot of the other Enneagram numbers, 8, I know exactly where they stand. 3, I pretty much know where they stand. 6s, I generally know where they stand. A 9, sometimes I don't, because they don't want to either criticize something or say something, or I can't tell. Not that they're being deceitful, but they just don't want to do anything that will upset the apple cart. So it can be I find it really, really challenging.
So I know you're not an Air Force man, you're an Army man, right? Or National Guard man, but Army, yeah. So, but the Air Force, what's that plane that flies? That's a spy plane. It doesn't get picked up by radar.
Like the stealth bomber or something.
Yeah, the stealth. So the stealth technology is right that it's hard to read by design, it's hard to read a 9. They have this stealth-like quality where it's almost like the threes will blend in, but threes blend in to succeed. 9s will blend in to disappear. So 9s are kind of, when they come up against conflict, when they come up against something that's difficult, they'll almost disappear into the background. Sometimes there are even people report not even knowing they're in the room because it's a stealth strategy to
Yeah.
detect.
I wonder if that's why they're good politicians too, right? They can, I mean, you mentioned Bill Clinton, you mentioned Barack Obama. You kind of don't know what they're thinking half the time. So they're good in many ways if you're looking for that skill set.
Totally. Barack Obama had some very edgy policies, but the way he presented felt unifying. Again, not a political commentary, but he got away with things. I think that his counterpart, for instance, last week's conversation, what's his name? Trump, right? Was the exact opposite. Trump couldn't get away with anything.
Oh, we determined that Trump is a 6, was it?
8.
An 8. He's an 8. Okay.
Right. So he has no stealth.
No stealth. That's right. We talked about that last time. No stealth. He's so direct. Where it's actually interesting when you talk about warfare, because I'm reading a book on strategy by kind of a classic book on strategy where they're talking about indirect warfare versus direct warfare, which is kind of the idea. Right.
That's
and
exactly
the
right.
9s are the indirect warfare people, and the 8s are the, I think, direct warfare people in many ways.
So I watch it play out every day in my house because I have a teenage daughter who's an 8 and a teenage daughter who's a 9. And my 8 is a direct warfare, and my 9 is an indirect warfare. And my 8 always gets busted for everything, and my 9 never gets busted for anything. But they're equally engaged in this brinksmanship. But my 9 daughter drags my 8 daughter over the line, so it looks like the 8 is the one who's transgressing all the time.
That's funny. That's funny.
And now that I have the Enneagram, it's like I have my 9's battle plans, and I keep calling her on this stuff. Like, yeah, you didn't exactly. It's not a lie of commission. You didn't do it. It's a lie of omission. It's what you're leaving out, right? It's the indirectness.
Well, it's funny because Sir Basil Littlehart, who wrote this book, it was kind of, probably right after World War II, about World War I and II, and this if you did the Enneagram for strategy, which I'm sure obviously we've talked about before, and you think about, there is, if you know your opponents, you kind of have to understand that a little bit and how to communicate with them as a result, that someone's going to be direct, great, indirect, great, but can be tougher. The direct can feel personal. The indirect, they never ruffle you when they're indirect, which is great. And the 8s can ruffle you because they're so direct. But the 8 is not personal. What about the 9s? Is the indirect personal, isn't it? I think you mentioned that before. The indirect passive aggressive is the hard part.
It is. It absolutely is. And when you're with the 9 who really isn't aware of their, she's a teenage girl, so I wouldn't expect her to be doing this work yet. But someday she's going to have to do the work of just being present. Because with my 8 daughter, like you're saying, where you stand, you're in the room with her, you're engaged. You may not like everything that comes out the 8's mouth, but it's true. You don't have to guess. The 9, it's like you want to reach into her and grab her and pull her out. Like, where are you? Be here, be honest, tell me the truth. And that's a way of withholding, right, from the relationship.
Yeah, what causes the difference? I mean,
well, 9s are scared of conflict because they've told that these are all defense strategies for all of us. A 9 tells themselves that they aren't worthy, that they aren't capable. There's a lot of this self-talk that goes on, that they feel less than. They feel like middle child, which my 9 is a middle child. And so if they get into conflict, they're going to lose your support. They're going to lose your love. They're going to lose the relationship. So they do everything they can not to lose you, to the point where they'll just say yes, but they mean no, as opposed to learning how to say yes, and you won't lose me. I love you, sweetheart, but you need to speak the truth to me, and you need to know that that's a real relationship. There's going to be conflict. There's got to be conflict. If there's not conflict, it's not a real relationship.
Right. It is interesting. How does the birth order work into the Enneagram in that sense? I'm sure in your own thing, there must be high correlation in certain traits.
I would not be surprised if a lot of nines were middle children, or maybe you get the last child who gets a little more lost in the shuffle. My sister's a middle child. My daughter's a middle child. I mean, that's obviously not a lot of data, but I would imagine they're rarely firstborns or only children, because you have to take arrows as a firstborn. There's
Right.
no way around conflict.
Right.
I took all these arrows. My sister came behind me. Everything she looked, amazing compared to me, right? Because she didn't do anything, because I did it all. So I don't know, but I do know that nines, it's a mixed bag. All of these are mixed bags. It's a blessing and a curse. And my work with nines is usually speak up, take up space, use your voice, say no, cause conflict. And that's the opposite message we would give to an 8.
Fascinating.
So
And
from
it goes into our conversation about finance. It's hard to pull out sometimes what a 9 is trying to tell you, so they don't, disagree. So I'm trying to learn more and help the 9s more and not overpower them, because they'll just agree with me, even if they don't want to.
And that's so important, to give a 9 permission to disagree, right? And
Okay.
to put them in a position where they don't feel like it's existential. It's not, I'm going to lose you. It's no, like, we're going to disagree over this, but you're not disagreeable, and we're not disagreeing over the relationship. We're moving forward, but we're going to just agree to disagree. Like, that's okay.
Yeah. I like that, giving them permission to disagree, just like asking almost. It's a good technique, I suppose.
Another one of my favorite movies was American Sniper. I think it was American Sniper, with the famous sniper, just blanked on his name. Kyle, I forget. But anyways, there's a scene when he came home from the war, and I think it was this movie, or is it that, or was the other one? But he was standing at this supermarket in the cereal aisle and looking at like 10,000 choices of cereal, and he couldn't make a decision. It was like choice fatigue. And yet here was a guy who was pulling the trigger, and one of the ultimate decisions somebody would have to make in life, to be a sniper. So 9s can make really clear, sharp, hard decisions. They oftentimes don't do well when they're presented with too many choices, right? Conflict comes up. So practical example, Shoshi, that's my daughter. What do you want for dinner? I don't know. Shoshi, do you want Mexican or do you want Chinese tonight? Oh, I want Chinese. A limited choice range. You can watch a 9. They can make that decision. But when there's so much overwhelm, what happens to 9s is they go into shutdown mode.
That is interesting. The overwhelm, right? I think I've seen that with the 9s that I am close with. Too much can cause a shutdown. They don't want that many inputs, but they can make, like you said, great decisions, but they don't want to have all the the other noise in the decision-making process.
So 9s have like a thinner veil to them in the way they move through the world. They can't shut out noise. 3s are good at shutting out noise, right? 8s are good at shutting out noise. 7s are good, not coincidental. These are kind of the powerhouses. But 9s don't filter it out. So it's almost like my daughter gets overwhelmed with a ton of noise, especially her noisy 8 sister. It's almost like, I don't want to say it's autism, but there's this quality of they can't filter out the stimulus, and it's bombarding them, and you can feel them go into shutdown mode. Here, let me give you 5 examples to our listeners of 9 billionaires, Enneagram 9s who are billionaires: Walt Disney, Jim Henson, Steve Wozniak, George Lucas, and Snoop Dogg. I don't know if Snoop Dogg's probably not a billionaire, but either is Jim Henson. But they're successful human beings.
He should be.
But what do they all have in common? What do they all have in common? Snoop Dogg, George Lucas, Steve Wozniak, Jim Henson, Walt Disney.
Well, they're all incredibly creative, I'll say that. I mean, that's different, but
That's
at
it.
9, though, I wouldn't, that wouldn't be the first thing that comes to my mind, but when you mention all of those, in fact, not only are they creative, they're the world's most creative people who've ever lived in many ways, right?
Creative genius. Creative genius. Why?
Yeah.
Because why
Why?
didn't you know that?
Yeah,
Because
why didn't
you don't see the duck under the surface paddling. You don't see the iceberg is 90% underwater. All you see is the top 10%. That's a strategy. They don't present what's going on inside. They have the most rich inner life, creative life. There's a world going on inside a 9. They only show you fragments. So
That's
there's a
fascinating. I
lot
can't
inside
believe
the 9.
those examples. That's kind of very powerful. And Steve Wozniak,
Nines,
I mean,
9s are creative powerhouses.
Walt Disney.
Something I think you said it last week though.
Snoop
They
Dogg.
usually partner. They usually partner with a force, with a doer. So Steve Wozniak, Steve
Oh
Jobs.
yeah, so Steve Jobs is, I'm assuming, is an 8. I can't remember if he's an 8, but is he an 8? Steve Jobs must be an 8, right?
Steve Jobs is an 8. Last week's conversation pairs up
Yeah.
with the 9.
You said that, yeah. I mean, but he's just, you feel it, right? I just said he is an 8. But he, like you said, he partners with the 9 nicely. In fact, that's one of the great things you and I have had some side conversations on, the partnerships of the Enneagram, like what are the best combinations sometimes as a team, which is very important, as you're servicing clients. Like if I'm a 3, who do I best partner with? Maybe I don't partner well with certain people and vice versa. Who are the people most likely? Because I think last week you mentioned 2s and 8s tend to go well together, for example.
2s and 8s, 9s and 8s, because 2s
Kind
are relationship, right? 9s are relationship.
That's a that's what I've been thinking about since our last podcast, is the combinations of why it is and where his weakness, and how to best leverage that and magnify that to provide the most value to whoever you're partnering with, or whoever you're helping or dealing with, whether it's your family, friend, spouse, client, boss, coworker.
If you look
a
at
fascinating thing.
it's imperative.
Yeah, because you wonder, and I think you've talked about this before, 2 9s working together might not be the best thing, or 2 8s or 2 3s, but too many of the same. You do need some complementary people in the operation.
Absolutely. So look at this. This is interesting. So George Lucas, right? George Lucas was a creative genius, but I just listened to a long 5-part podcast about him. He was not a business genius. He was not the execution part of the project. He partnered with many people like Francis Ford Coppola, who was a powerhouse, who got things done. And then you look at obviously Wozniak and Steve Jobs. You look at Walt Disney and Roy Disney, Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. Like, these are partnerships.
Yeah, I think there's a whole podcast developed to, what a great partnerships look like.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I mean, Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. I mean, what's better than that? Right.
You need one.
But look at Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, Martha Stewart's an Enneagram 1,
She's
right?
a 1 and he's a 9, but right next to each other, but opposites. I mean,
In many ways,
right? But they're perfect, right? Perfect in a sense.
So here's a funny little story. So I was at a cannabis conference years back, and you can't judge a book by its cover, because Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart were up on stage announcing their new cannabis play. I forgot what it was. And Martha Stewart says, "So I have a pop quiz for you. Only one of us up here has been in prison. Which one?"
My God.
And it was so funny. The rap star, whatever, is not the guy. It's the white woman from the suburbs. And
white woman who bakes cookies. Right?
Don't judge a book by its cover, right?
Right.
And so,
that is funny.
but it's true about 9s too. 9s, you can't. Oftentimes we talk about 9s as if they're like passive, quiet types, and some powerful figures throughout history have been nines. Lots of generals have been nines.
That's the part that I've been struggling with, because I'm thinking of peacemakers, I'm thinking of passivity. But when you mention the people that you're talking about, it's anything but that in so many ways. They're really just more indirect is what I'm coming up with this, that they're just going to be, they don't want to directly confront something or directly do something. They want to indirectly do it. And indirect, that's why it's so hard and more. Indirect's 10 times as hard to pull off. It's harder work than being direct. Because you got to think about being indirect, right? You got to work it. Being direct is like Trump. I mean, whatever he's thinking, you know what it is, right? There's no nuance of thought.
No nuance.
But
So
Barack Obama, I bet, is thinking through every little grammatical letter and thing and what he's doing.
So there's a lot going on behind the scenes with nines, and what you see is not what you get. And that's important to know with nines.
The peacemaker is not what you get. That's the irony of it, right?
And don't underestimate this person, because they spent their whole life being underestimated. People just kind of walking past. So here's another story. I don't have that many, but they're all nines. So I was in the cannabis industry, and I was visiting a place, and Scottie Pippen was there visiting too. And we collided with me in this group and him in the group, and he introduced himself to the group, and he says, "Hi, I'm Scottie Pippen." Everybody in the group's like, "We know who you are." Everybody knows who you are, Scottie Pippen. There was a humility, there was an indirect, you may not know who I am, because I live my life conveying that I'm not all that central. I'm not that, without Scottie Pippen, I don't think there would be a Michael Jordan. Like, I think he made it possible.
It's a perfect example of the Enneagram, right? I mean, Michael Jordan, I'm thinking, is a 3.
Yeah,
maybe an
all the
8,
way,
3.
all the way.
But to have the 9 and the 3, and they were the perfect partnership. Basketball wise, but personality wise too. So that is, like I said, you fascinated me with this constant, array of,
think what you'd have to have going on inside of you to be a 7'2" man in this space with, the tallest other guys like a foot and a half shorter. Introduce yourself like people don't know who you are. He must truly have this kind of subdued, humble quality to be a 9. And that is both a blessing and a curse, because nobody ever gets sick of being around 9s. They're not the ones who hog up space. The flip side, though, is there is a level of like, step out, step into the limelight, tell me the truth, be direct.
right.
And so that's the work for a 9. And I imagine the work you got to do with your 9 clients.
Yeah, I think that they're, like I said, very pleasant people, which is great, right? Pleasantry is not the issue. They're great to be around, but it can be a little bit tough to translate, if you will, what they need. And that is sometimes the hard part of what you do. But knowing, that's why this is so powerful, as you help us have clients understand what Enneagram they are, or our own staff, or myself. And why this is so important for people who listen in the audience is that now that I know this, and if I know someone is a 9, it gives me a whole different tool set to know what I'm dealing with, spend more time with them, ask them to disagree. And you've laid out pages of material. It's like cheat sheets, crib notes, if you will, in the old days. I don't think they still exist, but of how to deal with it. And it's helpful to make it a more meaningful relationship. Who would have ever told me in the history of my life that they think I'm a good communicator? It wasn't one of my great strengths historically, in the sense of, it wasn't what I was leading with. That yes, he listens to me, he understands me, right? That never heard that before until you started coaching me. You started tuning into their perspectives.
I think especially with the more enigmatic types for you as a 3, it's harder to read. And so this is a roadmap. This is a cheat sheet, like you're saying, because, for a 3, it's much easier to be with an 8 or a 7, because what you see is what you get. But with a 9, with a 4, with a 5, there's a lot of what's underneath the surface. And this can show us some of what's underneath the surface.
I love that. What's underneath the surface, right? This is all underneath the surface stuff.
And then what's underneath the surface is way more than what a 9 is showing you. So it's important to know that they're creative, that they're, they're also known as the most stubborn of all the Enneagram types, weirdly, because again, they come across as so passive, but on the inside, they're the mule. They're digging in their heels. They're saying no. They're just saying it with a smile. They're saying yes, but they mean no. We call this one the moderate investor. And it's just so telling of the 9, because it isn't that they don't have money. It isn't that they don't make money. It isn't that they aren't interested in money. But if they're not conscious, everything they do is moderate, right? The way they come
Well,
across as moderate.
you laid it out there because I think you put General Eisenhower as a 9, if I recall. Right?
Eisenhower is a 9.
And same thing as an investor, or even his battle plans were always conservative. They weren't anything like Patton, who was an 8, right? Striking hard and boldly, where Eisenhower would not. It was definitely, he had the cruise control on when you do things, but he's able to bring groups together where, because he was indirect and able to, be self-disciplined in that way. And the same with the investors. You're not going to tell a 9 investor, let's do the newest age, like cryptocurrency. It's not something that is probably they're attuned to. But a blue chip stock is something that they may like, right?
Absolutely.
Or treasuries, stuff like that, or companies that they understand. They'd love to buy companies that they buy their products for.
Absolutely. They're going to be one of the most types that need to feel comfortable, to feel secure with their financial advisor, right? There can't be that kind of conflict. They have a sixth sense in some ways for being controlled, because 8, 9, and 1 are all part of the body triad. So 8, 9s, and 1s really know when they're being played, when they're being controlled. Autonomy is so important for 8s, 9s, and 1s. And so 9s really can sense when somebody is pushing them into something they don't want to do, or they're being bullied. And it's very important, not that, you or any financial planner would, but it can come across very quickly to a 9 as being pushed, as opposed to being led and explaining. And the transparency is so deeply important. So a 9 can feel comfortable with you.
Yeah, like you said, you've given the old days, like AAA, we give you the roadmap to get to your destination. This system that you've created helps get to that end that we talked about a long time ago when we first started this podcast, the previous podcast series, of ways, ends, and means. This is understanding the end of the journey of how someone communicates and thinks is so critical to the investment framework.
Absolutely. Absolutely incredibly important. And, the fact that you take it seriously, I can see translates to people responding to it, to feeling seen, right, by their financial planner, which is not something we usually think of. I'm going to go to be seen by my financial planner. He gets me. But it's critically important that people feel seen.
I think they become better investors as a result. And I too, to be able to understand what they want to invest in and how to get the best outcomes. To translate that, not pushing things that don't make sense for someone with those tendencies.
That's right. So how about we just end with some 9-ish companies? I throw these out there and we can talk them through. All right. So 9s are also very, they're compassionate. I would say there's probably a lot of clergy who are 9s, by the way. If I had to guess, I would say mostly 9s, 1s, and 2s are clergy. 9s doing it from a compassion, maybe a hospice kind of a worker would be a 9, just somebody who really is calm, who's comfortable, who brings down the noise, but also stands by their values. 9s are very value based. And so I would say, like, for instance, a Chick-fil-A. Why? Because it impresses the hell out of me that Chick-fil-A closes down on Sundays, sacrificing, they leave like $1 billion a year on the table because their values are, like them or not, I could care
Yeah.
less, that we don't work on the Sabbath and neither do our employees. And the Christian Sabbath is Sunday.
I know. It was unbelievable as I was driving down from Boston. I couldn't get my Chick-fil-A sandwich on a Sunday. But they hold to it, and wow, it's pretty impressive, right?
Yeah. So, but that's that quiet strength, right? People disagree with it, people pissed about it, people have something to say about it, and they just kind of are resolved. There's a resolution with a
Yeah.
9. And it's quiet. It's, like I don't hear Chick-fil-A really like using that as a marketing strategy.
No, it's the opposite. In fact, yeah, they don't say, a peep about it. It is kind of interesting, right? You feel that deep devotion to their principles, which is pretty impressive. And maybe nines have that deep down. They have those deep principles. I don't know if that's deeper than certainly a 7 or a 3 or other people, but they seem to be principled people in many ways that I've met.
So that's that resolve. That's that stubbornness, in a good way. I'm stubborn around my values, and they can just kind of disappear while the world around them, squawks about it, and they stand quietly in their strength when they're doing the work. Here's the Jewish version of Chick-fil-A, Timberland, right? In your neck
Yeah.
of the woods, Jeff Schwartz, at least when it was before it was sold, I guess. I don't think he's still running it. I doubt. Do you know?
I think they sold it. I think
Yeah.
you're right.
But there was a lot of decisions he made from a Jewish faith perspective. Like I remember when they severed ties with China over abuses in the factories, or there was a lot of philanthropic work he would do regards to Israel. But again, just modeling his values in his business. And I think that's a very 9-ish thing.
Yeah, every business you've listed on the great handout PDF that you did are all principal businesses in many ways.
Yeah. So I just listed a bunch of principal businesses. Tyson Foods is another one, In-N-Out
Yeah,
Burger,
I mean,
JetBlue.
Tyson Foods, but In-N-Out Burger, maybe JetBlue isn't quite as principled per se, but they sort of have a strategy and a principle, right, of doing things their way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the origins of a company is probably more telling than what the company currently is.
Exactly. You said that's the Church of Latter-day Saints, right?
Yeah.
It's more based.
Yeah, but seeing grow out these companies that grow out of a value position. And again, they change over time. I had said in our Enneagram 2 podcast, Ben and Jerry's, the argument could be made they're 9 too as well. So, but you get the theme, you get the vibe. These are not cutthroat type companies, at least in their origins. They're not only bottom line driven. There's other factors involved. And I think that's a very 2, a helper, and a 9 peacemaker proposition.
Business does seem, to be going in that direction, to be less involved with the bottom line. Even investors, you have to know this about investors, certain, investors aren't completely concerned with just the bottom line. They want to know what they're investing in. They want to know how they're helping either the world or doing something, other values, or invest in things that may not produce the same rate of return, but it's good for the world or family or other things. So that's kind of an important part too, because to understand that about an investor, they get meaning out of their investments too.
Yes. But also to understand, like if they're your employee, and you want to incentivize them, 9s will leave money on the table. If it means they can have their autonomy, if they can mean, like, for instance, post-pandemic, they're going to be one of the more likely types to want to continue to have the ability to work from home. They like that less stress. That's valuable to them. And 9s are known not to be the highest earners, not because they're not capable, but because they aren't always willing to trade that diminishing returns for you get an extra $30,000 a year, but you're going to have to give up and commute more. You're going to have to do this, and they don't want to sacrifice that peaceful part of their life.
That is fascinating, kind of the riskometer, the stressometer of each member of the Enneagram, right? And I'm assuming 9 might be the lowest, who they avoid stress the most, or maybe don't want stress in their lives, where an 8, probably fueled by stress.
Exactly. Nines and fives are they're the ones
Yeah.
who want the least amount of stress. And you
Yeah.
see that common thread with your nine and your five clients because they really don't want to turn up the noise even if it's going to make them more money, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So again, like you said, crypto, the anxiety that may come from that yeah, maybe you're going to get more reward, but the anxiety is not a worthy trade.
That's unbelievable insight, because it's very, very important in what you invest in and what the range and continuum of stress level is. You can get great returns, but it could be very stressful for the ride.
So yeah, nines are always, I'll end with this, but nines really steer clear from the extremes in their life, and they like that bell curve, that kind of center space, to just play it safe in there. And so part of your work though is to get them to break off to the edge, to be an outlier at certain times, to be a risk taker at certain times, and that's part of the work too. Not just to remain in our comfort zone, but to break out of it. And I know you have the ability to help a nine become more three-ish.
Learning to understand each piece and try to, like you said, defy your number, which is what your one of your many insights into the system is. Just because I'm a three or just because someone is a nine doesn't mean we can't learn from the other pieces or improve the areas or understand it better. And that's why this is so important, is to not rely on just your instincts.
Challenge yourself to not retreat to I am a nine, but I react like a nine, I respond like a nine, but I am so much more than any one of these numbers. And that's the work that Michael and I really do with you, is we help you realize you are so much more than a number, whether you're working with Michael or myself. And it's really, I think I speak for both of us, it's our honor and privilege to continue to defy these numbers.
No, it's an honor and privilege to be part of the incredible system that you've built here. So thank you for bringing me along as a passenger.
I love it. And now we've wrapped up the journey around the Enneagram, and each one you've mentioned like 5 new topics. So I don't think we're going to run out of topics
No, we have a lot of specialty topics, which I think I'm very excited to explore. People did mention our Ted Lasso Enneagram discussion, and I think we're going to have to, I don't know if we have to do one, I think in Yellowstone, since that's on right now, or stuff like that. But people like that because they can identify with characters and they're easy to remember. So I think that'll be a lot of fun and insightful to help bring real life examples, because I'm sure people will now know that Snoop Dogg's a 9. That's all you have to know. And Martha Stewart's a 1.
We're gonna do the Enneagram of Yellowstone. We're gonna do President's Day next month, the Enneagram of
It is
Presidents.
President's Day next, which will be an interesting one.
Maybe we'll do one on MLK Day coming up, MLK versus Malcolm X type thing. There's a lot of good stuff here. So
There's a lot of holidays coming up, so we definitely have some good information.
we got to do one for Valentine's Day for sure.
I knew you were coming back, as I say that, he's an expert in kind of human relations. So everyone's going to be asking for, how does this work for Valentine's Day to be my Valentine and stuff. And I think there is a lot to say about maybe not figuring out, your match per se, but being able to communicate the person that you want to communicate with.
Yeah, if we figure out the matchmaking piece of this, man, that could be a whole podcast unto itself. So
that one you're solving, probably the world's oldest problem, right? If you can.
I don't see a ton of people tuning in to listen to a 3 and an 8, a male 3 and a male 8, wax too poetic about that topic. But we'll try. We'll give it a
how to work. But it is, fascinating approach to all human dynamics, from what I found. Superb tool that you created in Wealth 360, bringing it also your kind of strategy 360 to B2B businesses and other things, so people can understand. And for people who don't know, and I know this is going on a bit long, but B does this incredible job with businesses and creates what I think is his number one slide of kind of identifying gaps in your business as to how to improve your business strategically based on the personality assessments that you have. And when he did it for mine, I almost fell over with like realizing what I didn't have in my business. I had too much of certain things and I didn't have a lot. And I think as you've done this for other businesses, it's all the same. You're overweighted in certain areas, probably naturally in the business that you're in, but we're thin in areas where we have too many tight ends and not enough wide receivers or something.
That's right. And people don't even realize it because we have what's it called? Bias. We see the world through a particular lens, confirmation bias, and we start surrounding ourselves with the same types of people who see the same types of problems. That's why we need diversity. But I've been saying this. I'm glad we have, all kinds of new diversities in part of the conversation, racial and sexual and gender and all these things. I think they're important advances in our society, but let's not forget we can be different colors or different religions and still have the same way we think, the same way we feel, the same way we act. And the Enneagram goes underneath all of that to find out true diversity in thinking, feeling, and action. And that's when things become interesting.
You have peeled the onion back deeply. There's no
We're going to
question
keep
about that.
going.
Yeah.
All kinds of diversity outside and inside and everywhere in between. And we are going to continue to evolve the conversation. So stay tuned. And yes, check back in for Yellowstone. That's going to be a hot topic. So,
For sure.
All right. Thanks, brother. Pleasure as always.
Thanks. Great to see you. And look forward to our next podcast next week.
See you next week.